of Belgrade in the early hours after NATO air raids. Air raid sirens, we know, did sound in the capital the first time about 4 hours ago, and the Yugoslav state news agency is saying that the refinery is in flames and the fire brigade has been trying to get the fire under control. They've also been claiming that a residential area has been hit, but of course there's no word from NATO yet as to what is going on.
For 21 days, the Harrier pilots have been flying out from Gioia del Colle Air Base to bomb Serb units and military installations. They're a small but important part of the NATO air campaign. Last night they hit a fuel depot in Kosovo. It's a stressful time for the pilots who can't be identified, but morale is said to be high.
You just keep going, you know. What you do obviously is makes you focus when you're doing it. So it's not so much a problem of if can you do it. We work fairly regular hours, so your body clock gets used to it. So no, it's fine.
Yesterday, the United States Air Force joined the RAF at Gioia del Colle with A-10 tank busters. The two squadrons will be planning joint bombing missions.
Well, we've been working with them very closely, and we train in peacetime with them a lot. I think having them here is a good thing. It means that liaison will be much closer, and I think we'll be a more effective team.
About 300 ground crew keep the Harriers in the air in a round-the-clock operation. Close to 30 missions have been flown. All the pilots and planes have returned unscathed.
Bombs higher up, and because of what turbulence there might be coming down, but it's very light. The sort of laws of ballistics allow you to drop bombs and be able to calculate them. So it is actually now an art that has been perfected. So I don't think there's too much of a problem with that. What you want to do, of course, is to drop the bombs through the most amount of damage to the Serb military or the police units without either wasting them or hitting civilian buildings.
What all this is proving still, though, or reconfirming, is that it's a long, slow, grinding process to carry out an air campaign to achieve objectives on the ground, isn't it? Now, you went to the Minister of Defence briefing today. Did you get any sort of glimmer at all that they're considering more seriously a ground campaign? Major General Wald was talking about. What did you make of these? I mean, it struck me a lot of these were quite old pictures, aren't they?
Some of them are old, and in fact some of them we saw last night as well, but which is quite interesting, that they seem to be quite limited in the numbers of pictures they have, and you can understand why this happens sometimes, because not all of the footage would come through well. But this is the 30th of March.
I mean, what are they doing?
I think this is demonstrating...
In this day and age, we'd be expected to see yesterday's assessment.
Well, this is actually the footage that we saw yesterday, because this is an interesting one that was being shown at the NATO briefing yesterday.
Right.
By Colonel Freitag, and this is the one where there are two aircraft strikes on this. The target where the crosshair is on at the moment, ignore the general's pointer, but the crosshair of the target in the centre there, that target was hit, but also the target just kind of coming into the top right-hand side, the L-shaped building, and that was hit again. You see that being hit, but the aircraft that we're seeing this from is hitting that other target. Now, I'm surprised that they're showing that again. Obviously, they, rather like in the Gulf War, they showed a sort of selection of 20 or so videos rather than the several hundred that they've done. But here again, a use for the cluster bomb munition against an ammunition depot. This is where they had to penetrate through the cloud. You can see the sort of cloud cover that they're getting there.
More illustrative than contemporaneous?
Yes, I think illustrative. He wants to show, first of all, that they're hitting targets. Secondly, that the sort of targets they're hitting, like the ammunition depots, and you can see that because when they explode, you get the secondary explosions, as we've seen here with the cluster bomb. It's a little difficult to see because the pilot's avoiding anti-aircraft fire, I'd imagine, but those black sort of clouds there are the cluster bombs going in. I think also they wanted to demonstrate the full range of what they're doing.
Talk us through the Harriers, because there's been quite a bit more information about the Harriers, and particularly relating to the weather, isn't it?
Yes, there is. We've had a real problem with Harrier operations in the United Kingdom. This is our illustration of the use of a satellite to identify through cloud, because they can do that, Serb tanks. The fix of the satellite gives the Harrier has got a fix on the position, and it can drop its bombs accurately through the cloud. That sort of layer of cloud.
Pristina This airfield near Senica was hit twice in just 4 seconds. This, NATO says, is what a bomb camera saw just before hitting an early warning radar dome near Pristina. The Allies said Serb soldiers were hunkering down, in part to conserve fuel.
We're seeing American search and rescue teams wait to snatch pilots out of Serbian territory if they're shot down. The administration fears that any loss among their forces would soon erode support for action in Kosovo. But administration officials are facing a groundswell for a ground force and have acknowledged that contingency plans do exist.
First time considering sending ground combat troops into Kosovo. Under an option now being studied by NATO military planners, the troops would clear a ground corridor so relief supplies could be delivered to refugees trapped inside Kosovo.
We're deeply concerned that as many as 700,000 people are at risk within Kosovo. It appears that Belgrade is deliberately depriving them of food and shelter.
Another option under study, airdrop supplies to the refugees, just as the U.S. once did in Bosnia. Airdrops would be dangerous for the crews and probably end up in the hands of the Serb army. Clearing a ground corridor would also be dangerous, since the Serb army has been seen mining the roads leading into Kosovo. So far, neither option has been approved. So far, NATO is relying solely on airstrikes. The U.S. and its allies are making plans to send hundreds more aircraft in the coming weeks, as both sides seem bent on a long, hard fight.
We never say. The U-2 spy plane is at the forefront of the NATO search for evidence of massacres and war graves. It carries both conventional cameras and ground-penetrating radar and searches for areas of freshly disturbed earth which indicate where genocide victims may have been buried. NATO claims these photographs are the first evidence of genocide in Kosovo. Comparing the right photograph with the left reveals 96 freshly dug graves in 2 neat rows. But this may be just a fraction of the true scale of the horror. Of an miles inside Kosovo and the target of Serb militiamen 2 weeks ago. Reports from these KLA fighters, confirmed to Sky News by an independent source, indicate that 25 of the 300 villagers were murdered here. 13 of them were men, their bodies thrown down a mine shaft which was then sealed. It's thought to be only a matter of time before more such atrocities are uncovered. Paul Brennan, Sky News.
In Washington, Pentagon sources tell CNN the U.S. is sending several hundred more planes to add to NATO's arsenal, but the Pentagon says there is still no plan to introduce ground troops into Yugoslavia. CNN's military affairs correspondent Jamie McIntyre has more.
Pentagon sources say the railroad bridge was hit with one of America's newest, most accurate missiles, the video-guided AGM-130 fired by a U.S. F-15E. As seen in this direct hit on a Yugoslav early warning radar site, the missile has a camera in the nose that allows the weapons officer in the back seat of the F-15 to actually see and guide the missile to its target. The system also means NATO likely has a similar video showing there was a train on the bridge at the time of the strike.
We regret any loss of life that this may have caused, because our policy remains to minimize collateral damage.
In theory, if the F-15 co-pilot saw the train, he could have diverted the missile into the river. But NATO called the bridge a legitimate military target, saying it was part of an important resupply route used to transport reinforcements to the Yugoslav army in Kosovo. Meanwhile, the Pentagon released video showing how, despite cloudy skies that have hampered NATO bombing runs, pilots are still finding holes to hit forces on the ground. Here, an F-16 drops cluster bombs on an ammunition storage area near Pristina.
Weather is not a sanctuary for Milosevic. And so we have enough weapons to execute through the weather, and we'll continue to do that.
Pentagon sources say that 20 days into the operation, NATO has launched 757 attacks against 155 targets. And that cut off from supplies and support, the Yugoslav army is showing signs of sagging morale.
The air campaign is working. General Clark feels comfortable with it. He's executing that campaign at his pace, not at Milosevic's pace.
More satellite pictures released by the Pentagon showed Yugoslav forces hunkering down, hiding their armored vehicles in towns and bracing for attack.
Combat missions in Kosovo. Mr. Clinton says their work is part of the United States effort to stop the humanitarian crisis in Kosovo.
What you know and see every night, all those hundreds of thousands of innocent people uprooted, many of them killed, some of them dying from disease in refugee camps, some families divided forever. Not because of anything they did, but because they happened to be Albanian instead of Serbian, Muslim instead of Orthodox Christian. It is a human tragedy that touches everyone.
One of NATO's newest members is carefully watching the conflict in Yugoslavia. Poland is looking at how NATO operates as Warsaw tries to get Poland's military up to alliance standards. Polish television reports on how the nation is progressing.
A month in NATO, Poland has assigned about 10% of its armed forces, or 19,000 troops, for duty under the Allied command. The Navy was the first to report NATO ready, with 8 ships, 2 naval bases on the Baltic Sea and 2 airfields. The Air Force has come out with 8 MiG-29 fighters fully meeting NATO standards. By the end of the year, 24 Su-22 bombers will be modernized to join the NATO wings. The first unit to serve under NATO command, even before Poland got officially admitted to the alliance, was GROM.
We had the privilege and the honor to represent Polish armed forces at the international operation in Haiti back in 1994.
GROM is the Polish equivalent of the British SAS or the American Delta Force, ready to carry on special operation anytime and anywhere. Also, the 18th Airborne Battalion based in Bielsko in southern Poland was put under the Allied Southern Command before Poland joined NATO.
We are ready to be on the move within 24 hours' notice.
The 18th Battalion was specially trained to intervene in local conflicts. It might have gone to Kosovo had it been decided to deploy troops there. The men are conscripts, thus they have to volunteer for duty abroad, and they do.
It is an adventure I'd like to experience.
What counts is money, and I'd like to see the world.
The world out there is not exactly what they might have dreamt of. Their task is to enforce peace, but as it is, the peace has a price. Sibi pacem para bellum, the centuries-old saying goes. If you want peace, get ready for combat. And this is what the freshmen in the NATO do now. Barbara Grad, Polish television for CNN World Report.
Mr. Ken Bacon of the US Pentagon is calling it up close and personal with Serbian tanks, and this is the aircraft obviously to do that. It carries missiles and has guns, and it could work with the Harriers in low level, even being an air controller for them and directing them. So the combination is quite effective. But what's also worrying, of course, is every time we have more aircraft, up goes the money, and we're probably talking about the Americans having to provide about $3 billion for this aircraft. He asked over the weekend for another 82 aircraft, some tanker aircraft and some aircraft for suppressing air defences. And I think if you look at all that, putting all of those together, then certainly yes, what he was aiming to do now, I think, is to continue to bolster up the amount of aircraft. F-16s like these here. You could always do with more of those very versatile aircraft. Hornets for operating off the aircraft carrier, taking those on shore. If you look at the sort of aircraft he's got a very good selection of aircraft, but it's not just America, of course, that the 300 can come from. They might come from other nations as well. I'm sure
The NATO soldiers in Macedonia are still officially a peacekeeping force, but a ground war involving British troops now appears to look not only inevitable, but a question of sooner rather than later. Military analysts, consultants and army strategists all appear to agree it's now a question of timing. Contingency plans for a land attack have been drawn up for weeks.
Any military commander who doesn't make contingency plans for every eventuality, including an invasion of Yugoslavia, really shouldn't be in command. So I've no doubt at all that NATO has got contingency plans for everything, including the invasion of Yugoslavia. The thing is, do you do it? And that's a political decision. It's not a military decision. And yes, it can be done.
Lieutenant Colonel Angus Taverner, who's a consultant for the Ministry of Defence, believes NATO wants to dominate the skies before airlifting soldiers into the region to secure vital routes for backup troops.
If you're going to attack, then you would need to secure those routes before you could actually move the main force through. And so to achieve that, I would imagine that they would be considering an airborne assault of soldiers initially, probably using helicopters, having achieved the air superiority that they will need so that helicopters can fly safely.
Repeated denials by NATO politicians about a land attack are not surprising, say the planners, given that any admission would destroy the key element of surprise. But one ground forces analyst believes a land attack, probably as soon as 3 weeks' time, would be launched only once the Serbian army's defences have been seriously crippled. Alex Crawford, Sky News.
Taken from a tornado strike aircraft. If you look at this picture, the white buildings on the left, those are white buildings along in a row there, but look to the right, the large one on the right, it's targeted within the square in the center of the screen. And as you will see in a moment, the building was hit directly by the tornado aircraft. There it is, a direct hit.
At the very last second, he saw the passenger train in his bomb sights. Here's how General Clark put it.
He's seeing about this much. And in here you can see this is the railroad bridge, which is a much better view than he actually had. You can see the tracks running this way. Okay, let's run it. Look very intently at the aim point. Concentrate right there, and you can see how if you were focused right on your job as a pilot, suddenly that train appeared. It was really unfortunate. You can see the houses without any roofs all over town. This is the symptom of the ethnic cleansing, going in, throwing a grenade, starting a fire, turning on the gas before the grenade's thrown, and it blows the roof off. We've seen it all over Bosnia, and here it is. Next, more burned structures. All of these are destroyed. Next, a destroyed farm complex. No roofs. Here and here. All burned out. Next, wide-scale destruction. Here, 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 here. All up in here. These. It's a whole set of communities which have been devastated. Next, more burned structures. Here, here, up in here, over in here. And what you see when you look at this is a widespread, systematic pattern of ethnic cleansing. It's the familiar pattern over the last 10 years. Next, more. Next, here's where not only has he burned out the village, he's now moving in with military equipment in an effort to disguise himself and hide. And our analysts have picked out tanks hidden right up next to and inside these structures. Next, here's more armor concealed right here. An SA-9 air defense system and more destroyed villages. We've got the names of these little villages down here on the bottom of the slide. Next. Infantry fighting vehicles. Next. More tanks and reconnaissance vehicles. Next. Konikva airfield. This is a gun camera. You're going to watch another aircraft bomb fall on a that just happened to be on the runway at the wrong time. We were striking the airfield. We were going after hangars. We're not bombing runways normally. They tend to be relatively easily bypassed and repaired, but there was you can't quite make it out. There it is. If we could stop that, and you can, I don't know if you can roll that thing back or not, Pete. You can see the large fireball there as the MiG was hit. Next. Let's go to the next one. Here's a radar facility in Pristina. It's a radar and control facility. This is the area before it's been struck. Next. And now after it's been struck. Example, here is the Pristina radio relay facility. And This is one of the precision weapons we're using. You can see the tower coming into view right here, the building. Here's the aim point of the weapon. It's getting closer, it's going in, and it impacts. I think he was at Uroševac in Kosovo. This is a precision-guided weapon. You can see the target right over here. There'll be 2 struck actually in this sequence, as I recall. Okay, and then I think there's one that comes in over here as well. Yep.
True that a NATO bomber had hit a passenger train in Serbia, the Allies knew it was a massive PR setback to the campaign. This evening they've embarked on a damage limitation exercise, with the man in overall charge of the NATO operations in the Balkans himself explaining how the pilot concerned made his mistake.
Now the pilot in the aircraft is looking at about a 5-inch screen. He's seeing about this much. And in here you can see this is the railroad bridge, which is a much better view than he actually had. You can see the tracks running this way. Okay, let's run it. Look very intently at the aim point. Concentrate right there, and you can see how if you were focused right on your job as a pilot, suddenly that train appeared. It was really unfortunate. Here, he came back around to try to strike a different point on the bridge because he was trying to do his job to take the bridge down. Look at this aim point. You can see smoke and other obscuration there. He couldn't tell what this was exactly, and run this video. Focus intently right at the center of the cross. He's bringing these 2 crosses together, and suddenly he recognizes at the very last instant that the train that was struck here has moved on across the bridge. And so
out here, this would be considered one target again. There are several aim points in this target, several large buildings, and you can see that they have been systematically destroying their ability to sustain aviation and to actually repair and maintain aviation. And several of these areas have been hit. You can see that some are left, but this base right now from a standpoint of operability is pretty much down. There are some aircraft you can see on the tarmac, and I suspect that's exactly where they're going to be sitting until they can either do a repair on their repair capability or fix them in some other way, but they're basically stuck right there in that spot. Once again, an ammo area in Pristina, we're taking down this is one of the larger ones, and I just show you that it's a fairly large area, several kilometers across into hilly terrain. And this target here, I show you there's about 8 different target areas that have been struck on that one. And we talked about the new weapon systems we have. And a B-2 could take this out, and another one the same size with 1 load of bombs. So that's pretty good as the way it's working there. The airfield in Montenegro, we're not hitting targets in Montenegro except for self-defense. This was hit early on in the campaign, and what was taken out are some of the Montenegrin aircraft that were actually threatening NATO forces, and that's purely a self-defense target. Vehicle storage in Serbia, just like to say that you can see the areas where they did maintenance on their vehicles, military vehicles. They have been systematically destroyed, and they have no vehicle maintenance capability at this depot in Serbia anymore at Nice. Lastly, I'll just show you a picture from yesterday. This is in Melisevo area in Kosovo. You can see several buildings that have been, looks like destroyed or burned. The roofs are all gone. And this one here is burning, so they're still burning the villages in Kosovo. Next, I'd like to radar site in Dakovica, which is in Kosovo. It's an F-16. Once again, the target is right under the cursor. And you'll see that this early warning radar is one of the primary radars they have for detecting aircraft arriving or departing from Kosovo and the Fry. That was destroyed, and that was one of those red comm links I showed you on a map earlier today. Another target was struck north of there by another F-16. Next is a fuel truck in Kosovo. As I said earlier, we are taking down his sustainment in fuel both strategic storage and tactical. This is actually a fuel truck in Kosovo yesterday. It was destroyed once again by an F-16. He's still trying to get fuel in. It's very hard for him, and they have a paucity of fuel available. Novi Sad Army Barracks, once again, this is a surface-to-air missile defense facility, repair facility. This is an F-15 with an optically guided missile. It gets clearer as you get in, but this is a standoff weapon. And as you can see, you get closer into the building, and that building was, I would say, for all practical purposes, destroyed. Pristina Radio Relay, once again, I mentioned the comm sites, another F-15.